I'm Astro Thane. Welcome to this astrological deep dive exploring how astrology can help us see the patterns of history and what might come now and in the future. Specifically looking at Saturn's transit through Aries. My mission here is to dive into past Saturn and Aries periods. See what themes keep cropping up globally and then connect them to what's happening now, especially and specifically with the US and China trade war. Because that next transit is coming up later this month, going through about 2028, April 2028. There's a little bit of a dip back into Pisces in early 26, but basically that's the window that we are entering. That's the window we're talking about for this type of stuff. So, Saturn and Aries. Let me break down astrologically what that means first. What energies I am actually talking about. Well, Saturn, as you may know, is often about structure, limit, discipline, lessons, and a little bit of karma. It's the reality check, the get real planet. Then you have Aries, the first sign of the zodiac, all about initiation, taking action, being assertive, leadership, and sometimes conflict. Definitely sometimes conflict. It's pure forward momentum, that fiery spark. What happens when you put Saturn's brakes or structure onto Aries' accelerator? That's the interesting part. Astrologically, Saturn is said to be in its fall in Aries. That means it's not in its most comfortable placement. Its natural tendency towards caution, slowness, and building things step by step clashes with Aries' desire to just slam on the gas pedal and go. So you often get this dynamic of ambitious initiatives hitting roadblocks, frustrations, and needing discipline to push through impulse. There's a kind of inherent tension. Structure meets force, and it's not always a smooth ride. The potential for friction is on the upper side of high. With that energetic picture in mind, let me take you back through history. Where does Saturn and Aries show up prominently? Let's start way back in the late 18th century, 1778 to 1791. The big event then was the French Revolution, storming the Bastille, economic chaos, totally. There were severe economic problems, famine, and social unrest boiling over. Then, boom, the Bastille falls, old structures get torn down, new ideals are asserted very forcefully. Very Aries indeed. But then came the consequences, the long revolutionary wars across Europe. That's perhaps the Saturn part, the structure breaking, but also the difficult long-term process that followed. It's a powerful example of old orders crumbling. Jumping forward to the early 19th century, 1818 to 1821, the post-Napoleon, where things settling down? Not really. There were attempts to restore old monarchies, but also lots of nationalist and liberal uprisings in Spain, Italy, Greece. Very assertive energy. Crucially, you also had the Panic of 1819, a major financial crash in the US and Europe, linked to post-war credit issues and trade adjustments. So again, you see a mix of assertive political movements clashing with structural economic realities, amplified by that Saturn in Aries energy. Instability on multiple fronts. Moving through the 19th century to the mid-century, 1847 to 1850, another big one, the revolutions of 1848, the springtime of nations all across Europe. Interestingly, this was preceded by a really tough time. Crop failures, the potato famine, industrial downturn, mass unemployment, the pressure built up. And right as Saturn entered Aries, you get this explosion of demand for freedom and economic relief. Established authorities were seriously challenged. That theme of challenge authority seems extremely potent during this time. Many of these revolutions were ultimately suppressed, but the impulse, the attempt to radical change, is unmistakably there. What about the later 19th century, 1877 to 1880? This period saw major powers really consolidating their influence globally. the Russo-Turkish War, British expansion in Africa, assertive empire building, solidifying spheres of influence, and relative to today perhaps, governments starting imposing new trade rules, more protectionist policies. Why then? Largely a response to the economic depression of the 1870s. So Saturn structure imposing order via trade rules, perhaps in response to economic stress, while Aries provides the assertive national push. The protectionist link is definitely something I'll come back to. Let's hit the 20th century, early 1990s, 1908 to 1911. This time frame saw several crises that were predecessors to World War I, like the Bosnian annexation crisis, the Moroccan crisis, the Italo-Turkish War, lots of tension, assertive moves by nations laying the groundwork for something bigger, it seems. Then jump to the late 1930s, 1937 to 1940. This one included a brief slip back into Pisces, but World War II began. Japan's invasion of China in 1937, Germany's invasion of Poland in 1939. It's pretty hard to ignore the correlation with major global conflicts starting. Later in the century, the 60s, 67 to 69, although again with a dip back into Pisces, there was a period of incredible global turmoil. Vietnam War escalation, the Tet Offensive, the Six-Day War in the Middle East, the Soviet invasion of Czechoslovakia, crushing the Prague Spring. Then, in the U.S., assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy, huge protests worldwide in 1968. Just intense conflict and challenges to existing social and political order everywhere. It feels like reoccurring intensity. What about the most recent past, the end of the 20th century? That was 1996 to 1999, again with a slight Pisces retrograde. What stands out? Conflicts in the Balkans continued. Then the Asian financial crisis of 97-98, economic instability again, right? And the same time, the dot-com bubble was inflating rapidly. So geopolitical conflict, economic crisis, and the beginning of new economic bubble or structure. You see the theme of new beginnings, Aries, but maybe with those Saturnian limitations or consequences still down the road, which you saw in the bubble that burst later. Looking across these periods, what are the big reoccurring themes, astrologically speaking? Several stand out quite clearly. First, the tension between disciplined action and impulsive struggle. Aries wants to charge ahead. Saturn says, hold on, there are rules and there are consequences. This often leads to wars requiring endurance, hitting unexpected difficulties, and long, drawn-out consequences. Conflict and frustration are prevalent. Major wars, grinding conflicts, ambitious beginnings hitting limitations. And the authority piece, challenge authority, is huge. Revolutions, leadership crises, the rise of new leaders who often face immediate, serious challenges themselves. Economically, stress and restructuring seem almost constant companions, often linked to war costs, but also laying groundwork for future crises and major policy shifts. Trade issues often pop up, like the protectionism. Finally, there's a theme of beginnings and structural change. Old ways really do give away, sometimes violently, sometimes more gradually, but new foundations get laid. The new democratic ideas, the new UN later on, new economic policies emerging from crisis. It's fascinating how these energies seem to manifest. Now, obviously, historians point to geopolitics, economics, specific leaders, and those are the immediate causes, but the timing is so often aligns with Saturn entering Aries, there is definitely a cyclical backdrop, an energetic weather pattern, underlying rhythm, and that's what astrology allows us to see, the patterns. Let me bring this to the present, briefly looking at the US and China. What are the main economic aims right now for each? The U.S. is focused on stable growth, tech leadership, maybe bringing some manufacturing back, investing in infrastructure and chips. China is aiming for what they call national rejuvenation. Tech self-sufficiency is huge for them, AI and semiconductors. while also trying to manage some serious structural issues. The 3Ds: debt, deflationary pressures, and demographics, aging population and birth rates, plus boosting domestic demand. It's a very tricky balancing act for them. How would I characterize the relationship between them? Intense strategic competition. That's the headline across everything: militarily, economically, tech, diplomacy, ideology, and the trade war aspects involves escalating reciprocal tariffs, export controls on advanced tech going one way, critical minerals the other. Each sees the other as trying to contain them. Decoupling seems to be accelerating. Okay, so that's the stage. Now let me layer on the history that we learned. How might the upcoming Saturn and Aries transit 2025 to 2028 influence this US-China dynamic, but also sort of touching on a little bit of the world? Well, if history is any guide, Saturn entering Aries often correlates with heightened global tensions and the potential for significant shifts. So my first thought, expect the trade friction to continue, possibly even intensify. No quick resolution seems likely based on this pattern, and something might snap. With Aries and with Saturn, when Saturn enters a sign, there's always an event. There's always something that gets triggered by it. And based on this, somebody is going to make a rash decision. Somebody is going to do something extreme. That Aries exertion meets Saturnian reality could play out as an impulsive tariff hikes, hitting the hard reality of supply chains and economic pain on both sides. That theme of structure versus impulse in the economy could force both sides to confront the limits and maybe the unintended consequences of the trade war. This might lead to a policy adjustment, perhaps some serious restructuring of how they interact economically. What about challenge authority? You could see that as an existing global economic order itself challenged by this rivalry. The rules, the institutions, the leadership roles, they're all under extreme pressure, which links to that idea of new beginnings and new structures emerging. Past transits saw old structures give away. The period could potentially lay the groundwork for a new global economic order. You're already seeing talks of shifts, new alliances, maybe new trading blocks like BRICS Plus, discussing alternative financial systems, that kind of thing. Or how countries like India seem to be benefiting as supply chains reconfigure. It suggests a potential realignment, so intensified conflict, but also maybe forcing necessary restructuring and potentially leading to new landscape. That's a very plausible interpretation based on the historical cycles. But also, I can't ignore the economic stress theme. These periods often coincide with broader economic instability, so the fallout might not be limited to just the US and China, but could well ripple outwards, affecting the global economy more widely, mirroring those of the past episodes where financial stress was a key feature. It's quite a sobering picture, potentially. It highlights the weight of these transits, but then again, it's about understanding the patterns. Let me try and sum this up for you. I've looked back and seen Saturn's transit through Aries. It seems consistently coincide with periods of major global conflict, challenges to authority, and significant economic shifts and stress, reoccurring themes across centuries. And now you're heading into another one, from 2025 to 2028, right in the middle of this intense US-China trade rivalry. The timing is significant. It is right on cue. So drawing on these historical patterns, you might anticipate continued or even heightened tensions between the US and China. It seems likely the friction will persist and get much worse, possibly forcing some hard realities or policy changes on both sides. And this period could also, that potential for significant restructuring and the emergence of new dynamics, new alliances, seems very much in line with the historical signature of Saturn in Aries. It really encourages you to think about the cyclical nature of history, doesn't it? And how different perspectives like this astrological one can offer maybe additional layers of understanding. It adds another dimension to consider alongside the conventional geopolitics and economic analysis. Given this historical link between Saturn and Aries and major global realignments, what new global structures or maybe new power dynamics do you think might actually emerge from the US-China tensions during this transit? That's the big question. What new order might be forged in this period of pressure? Definitely something to keep watching. Thank you for listening to this deep dive into Saturn and Aries and its potential chaos in the US-China relationships. If you are interested in learning more about your business, your venture, or even yourself, then you can contact me down in the description below for your own personal reading. If you like this video, like it. If you disliked it, dislike it. Let me know what you think down below in the comments. I honestly want to know what you feel about this. Is a new approach that I am doing. I just have decided to take my astrological knowledge to its ultimate limit, and I'm using it to talk about these bigger, broader patterns that affect everybody so that you can be armed with the information to protect yourself as the winds of change come constantly blowing in your direction. Thank you for watching. I'm Master Thane, and goodbye.